MOvember 2020, day 23. Tonight I'm going to read from Pete Walker's Shrinking of the Inner Critic in Complex PTSD, which you can find on his website. It's a free PDF. And it's an article that was based on a chapter in his book, Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving, which is an essential bit of literature if you've come from a less than nurturing childhood experience. So, Shrinking the Inner Critic in Complex PTSD. In my work with clients repetitively traumatized in childhood, I am continuously struck by how frequently the various thought processes of the inner critic trigger them into overwhelming emotional flashbacks. This is because the PTSD-derived inner critic weds shame and self-hate about imperfection to fear of abandonment, and mercilessly drive the psyche with the entwined serpents of perfectionism and endangerment. Recovering individuals must learn to recognize, confront, and disidentify from the many inner critic processes that tumble them back in emotional time to the awful feelings of overwhelming fear, self-hate, hopelessness, and self-disgust that were part and parcel of their original childhood abandonment. Psychogenesis and the PTSD critic. A flashback-inducing critic is typically spawned in a danger-laden childhood home. When parents do not provide safe enough bonding and attachment, the child flounders in abandonment, fear, and depression. Many children appear to be hardwired to adapt to this endangering abandonment with perfectionism. This is true for both the passive abandonment of neglect and the active abandonment of abuse. A prevailing climate of danger forces the maturing superego to cultivate the various psychodynamics of perfectionism and endangerment listed at the end of this article. When anxious perfectionist efforting, however, fails over and over to render the parent safe and loving, the inner critic becomes increasingly hypervigilant and hostile in striving to ferret out the shortcomings that seemingly alienate the parents. Like the soldier overlong in combat, PTSD sets in and locks the child into hypervigilance and excessive sympathetic nervous system arousal. Desperate to relieve the anxiety and depression of abandonment, the critic-driven child searches the present and the future for all the ways he is too much or not enough. The child's nascent ego finds no room to develop, and her identity virtually becomes the superego. In the process, the critic often becomes virulent and eventually switches to the first person when goading the child. I am such a loser, I'm so pathetic, bad, ugly, worthless, stupid, defective. One of my clients gleefully remembered the constant refrains of his childhood. If only I wasn't so needy and selfish. If only my freckles would fade. If only I would pitch a perfect game. If only I would stop gagging on canned peas during dinner. If only I could pray all the time to get Mum's arthritis cured. Then maybe she'd stop picking on me. And then maybe Dad would play catch with me. Thoughts as triggers. In extremely rejecting families, the child eventually comes to believe that even her normal needs, preferences, feelings, and boundaries are dangerous imperfections, justifiable reasons for punishment and/or abandonment. In the worst-case scenarios where parents use children's words as ammunition against them, the mere impulse to speak sometimes triggers intense feelings of panic. How could anything the child says not reveal his stupidity and worthlessness, not get him deeper into trouble and rejection? As ongoing neglect and abuse repetitively strengthen the critic, even the most innocuous self-interested thought or musing can trigger a 5-alarm fire of intense emotional flashback. To maintain the elusive hope of someday winning parental approval, the child's anxious striving escalates and may even become a perfectionism that is truly obsessive and compulsive. More on perfectionism. Perfectionism is the unparalleled defense for emotionally abandoned children. The existential unattainability of perfection saves the child from giving up unless or until scant success forces him to retreat into the depression of a dissociative disorder, or launches him hyperactively into the incipient conduct disorder. Perfectionism also provides a sense of meaning and direction for the powerless and the unsupported child. In the guise of self-control, striving to be perfect offers I always get this word wrong, a simulacrum of a sense of control. Self-control is also safer to pursue because abandoning parents typically reserve their severest punishment for children who are vocal about their negligence. As the quest for perfection fails over and over, and as sustaining attachment remains elusive, imperfection becomes synonymous with shame and fear. Perceived imperfection triggers the fear of abandonment, which triggers self-hate for imperfection, which expands abandonment into self-abandonment, which amps fear up even further, which in turn intensifies self-disgust. On and on it goes in a downward spiral of fear and shame-encrusted abandonment. It can go on for hours or days, weeks in environmentally exacerbating conditions, and for those with severe PTSD can become the standard mode of being. More on endangerment. The importance and magnitude of the critic's endangerment dynamic cannot be overstated. I have in fact worked with numerous well-therapized individuals who are relatively free of perfectionism, but still seriously afflicted with the drasticizing process of the critic. Moreover, I have seen many individuals challenge and eliminate most of the blatant, perfectionist, self-attacking cognitions of the critic without effectively addressing its habit of flooding the psyche with thoughts, images, and feelings of fear. I learned to disidentify from perfectionism long before I learned to stop perseverating my critics' harrowing snapshots of danger into feature-long films about my imminent demise into total abandonment, public humiliation, lethal illness, pennilessness, homelessness, etc. One of my clients eventually identified the critic's endangerment process as critic as horror movie producer. I sometimes think of it as critic as terrorist, using anger to shrink the inner critic. Traumatizing parents customarily use intimidation and disgust to thwart the instinctive fight response of their children. Recovering the anger of the fight response is essential in healing complex PTSD. I routinely encourage clients to use their anger to stop the critic in its tracks and to help them move through the various self-attack dynamics that the critic uses to emotionally enforce perfectionism. Invoking the fight response is an irreplaceable tool for thought-stopping the critic's outdated fear and shame-based cognitions. Accordingly, I encourage clients to use phrases like, "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Mum and Dad," critic. "I'm in an adult body now and I won't let you hurt me." Additionally, I share Erik Erikson's emotional math, shame is blame turned against the self, adding that it is also the parent's disgust turned into self-hate. Typically, I embellish this with, you can externalize the anger of the critic's self-blaming messages out and away from you onto the installers of the critic, or sideways onto the critic itself. You can give shame back by allowing yourself to feel disgusted at the image of your parent bullying you and overwhelming you with shame when you were so defenseless. Inner critic that is dominated since childhood, however, does not give up its hegemony of the psyche easily. It obdurately refuses to accept the updated information that adulthood now offers, the possibility of increasing safety and healthy attachment. It is as if the critic has worn a flashback-inducing groove into the brain the size of the Grand Canyon, and any of the thinking patterns listed below now hair-triggered an amygdala hijacking into abandonment, fear, and depression. The work of reminding clients that progress in critic shrinking is often infinitesimally slow and indiscernible at first, and can seem as interminable to the therapist as the client. The client's addiction to only noticing what is wrong and what is dangerous, and like most addictions, requires lifelong management. In the early work, I encourage clients to challenge the critic's monocular negative focus over and over with all the ferocity she can muster. Eventually, I asked her if she can find a part of herself that is mad about how grossly unfair a parent's bullying and indifference was. Is there any part of her that is outraged that she was indoctrinated and inculcated into self-abandonment and self-bullying when she was too young to protest or even know what was happening to her? Is she willing now to gradually build her ability to say no or shut up whenever she catches the critic, the proxy of her parent, attacking her? With much encouragement and practice, the client gradually learns to reject her conditioning to self-blame or self-abuse and self-abandonment. Her sense of healthy self-protection begins to emerge and over time grows into a fierce willingness to stop unfair criticism, internal or external. Psychodynamically, this is part of the process of working through repetition compulsion. It aids the client to repudiate the parent's awful legacy of teaching her that love means numbly accepting abuse and neglect. Embracing the critic. In my experience, until the fight response is substantially restored, the average complex PTSD client benefits little from the more refined and rational techniques of embracing, dialoguing with, and integrating the valuable parts of the sufficiently shrunken critic. An important part of later recovery work, well described in excellent books in Embracing the Inner Critic by Stone and Soul Without Shame by Brown. Once again, however, these left-brain objective approaches are often very limited have limited use until they are backed up by a subjective right-brain stance of aggressive self-protection. Perhaps this is because the inner critic appears to align with the extreme right-brain dominance of flashbacks, as shown in MRIs, and perhaps inner critic processes are so emotionally charged and dominant that unremediated efforts to resist them rationally and dispassionately fail effortlessly. Thought substitution is another essential tool for empowering the work of thought-stopping the critic. I sensed many years ago that my critic became as tough as a bodybuilder's bicep through a myriad of repetitions. I guessed that if I similarly exercised the type of positive self-talk I described below, I would create some new and more helpful muscle that my thinking processes would exercise automatically at times of being triggered. I believe I'm not exaggerating when I say that hundreds of thousands of positive thought substitutions have rewarded me with a psyche that is fairly consistently user-friendly. Accordingly, I encourage clients to immediately confront the critic's negative messages and processes with positive ones. For even one such thought can act like a single virus and rage infectiously out of control into a flu-like melange of shame, fear, and self-abandonment. Moving quickly into thought stopping and substitution often obviates an abandonment. Moving quickly into thought stopping and substitution often, I'm repeating that line, often obviates a headlong tumble into a downward spiral of a flashback. Just as immediate prophylactic measures can thwart the first hint of a cold. Additionally, I often ask the client to write out a list of his positive qualities and accomplishments to recite when he finds himself lost and drowning in self-hate. This is especially important as flashbacks often create a temporary amnesia about one's essential worthiness and goodness. Flashbacks seem to involve a temporary loss of access to the more current left brain learning. MRIs show greatly reduced left brain activity in activated and unremediated PTSD individuals. Memorizing the list enhances one's capacity to dissolve that amnesia. Reciting part or all of the list over and over like a mantra also helps during these times when the critic is particularly severe and unsilenceable. If the client has little or nothing for the list, I supplement it with my own observations about her qualities, and I also ask her to seek her friend's input. Additionally, I remind her that qualities do not have to be perfect or ever present to qualify as qualities. If it is true of them most of the time, then it is a quality. Positive imaging is a powerful adjunct to thought substitution. Clients can learn to shortcut the perfectionist and fear-mongering processes of the inner critic by invoking images of past successes and accomplishments, as well as pictures of safe and loving places and friends. The therapist can also use guided meditations to demonstrate and reinforce the use of positive imagery substitution. Grieving helps shrink the critic. I repeatedly point out to clients how the work of grieving their childhood losses helps them realize the painful feelings, especially fear, shame, and depression, that fuel the assaults on the critic. This is step 9 in the aforementioned flashback management article. This article is an elaboration of step 8. These are in Pete's book, Complex Post-Traumatic Stress, and also the 13 tips on how to deal with emotional flashbacks, which you'll find on his website, and part of my MOvember 2020 campaign. I read through that as well. Here, then, is a list of 14 common inner critic attacks divided into key categories of perfectionism and endangerment. Each is paired with a healthier and more accurate thought substitution response. And so here is a list of those. Perfectionism attacks. Number 1, perfectionism. My perfectionism arose as an attempt to gain safety and support in my dangerous family. Protection is a self-persecutory myth. I do not have to be perfect to be safe or loved in the present. I am letting go of relationships that require perfection. I have a right to make mistakes. Mistakes do not make me a mistake. Every mistake or mishap is an opportunity to practice loving myself in the places I've never been loved. 2, all or nothing black and white thinking. I reject extreme or overgeneralized descriptions, judgments, or criticisms. One negative happenstance does not mean I am stuck in a never-ending pattern of defeat. Statements that describe me as always or never, this or that, are typically grossly inaccurate. 3, self-hate, self-disgust, and toxic shame. I commit to myself. I am on my side. I am a good enough person. I refuse to trash myself. I turn shame back into blame and disgust and externalize it to anyone who shames my normal feelings and foibles. As long as I am not hurting anyone, I refuse to be shamed for normal emotional responses like anger, sadness, fear, and depression. I especially refuse to attack myself for how hard it is to completely eliminate the self-hate habit. 4, micromanagement, worry, obsessing, looping, and over-futurizing. I will not repetitively examine details over and over. I will not jump to negative conclusions. I will not endlessly second-guess myself. I cannot change the past. I forgive all my past mistakes. I cannot make the future perfectly safe. I will stop hunting for what could go wrong. I will not try to control the uncontrollable. I will not micromanage myself or others I work in a way that, or others, full stop. I work in a way that is good enough, and I accept the existential fact that my efforts sometimes bring desired results and sometimes they do not. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, the serenity prayer. 5, unfair devaluing comparisons to others or to one's most perfect moments. I refuse to compare myself unfavorably to others. I will not compare my insides to their outsides. I will not judge myself for not being at a peak performance all the time. In a society that pressure us to acting happy all the time, I will not get down on myself for feeling bad. 6 is guilt. Feeling guilty does not mean I am guilty. I refuse to make my decisions and choices from guilt. I need to feel the guilt and do it anyway. In the inevitable instance where I am inadvertently hurt someone, I will apologize, make amends, and let go of my guilt. I will not apologize over and over. I am no longer a victim. I will not accept unfair blame. Guilt is sometimes camouflage fear. I am afraid, but I am not guilty or in danger. 7, shoulding. I will substitute the words want to for should, and only follow this imperative if it feels like I want to, unless I am under legal, ethical, or moral obligations. 8, overproductivity, workaholism, and busyholism. I am a human being, not a human doing. I will not choose to be in perpetual productivity. I am more productive in the long run when I balance work and play and relaxation. I will not try to perform at 100% all the time. I subscribe to the normalcy of vacillating along a continuum of efficiency. 9, harsh judgments of self and others - name calling. I will not let the bullies and critics of my early life win by joining and agreeing with them. I refuse to attack myself or abuse others. I will not displace the criticism and blame that rightfully belongs to them onto myself or current people in my life. I care for myself. The more solidarity, the more friendliness, the more unsustained I am, the more I will respect myself. Jane Eyre. The next section is endangerment attacks, and it starts with 10, drasticizing, catastrophizing, and hypochondrizing. I feel afraid, but I am not in danger. I am not in trouble with my parents. I will not blow things out of proportion. I refuse to scare myself with thoughts and pictures of my life deteriorating. No more homemade horror movies and disaster flicks. 11, negative focus. I renounce over-noticing and dwelling on what might be wrong with me and life around me. I will not minimize or discount my attributes. Right now, I notice, visualize, and enumerate my accomplishments, talents, and qualities, as well as the many gifts life offers me, e.g. friends, nature, film, food, beauty, colour, pets, etc. Time urgency, number 12. I am not in danger. I do not need to rush. I will not hurry unless it is a true emergency. I am learning to enjoy doing my daily activities at a relaxed pace. I just lost my point, but I will find it. Number 13, disabling performance anxiety. I reduce procrastination by reminding myself that I will not accept unfair criticism or perfectionist expectations from anyone. Even when afraid I will defend myself from unfair criticism, I won't let fear make my decisions. And 14, perseverating about being attacked. Unless there are clear signs of danger, I will thought stop my projection of past bullying and critics onto others. The vast majority of fellow human beings are peaceful people. I have legal authorities to aid my protection if threatened by the few who aren't. I invoke thoughts and images of my friends' love and support. So that's Shrinking the Inner Critic by Pete Walker. There's so much in that. Even when I go back to that, just the first piece where he says that, the PTSD derived inner critic weds shame and self-hate about imperfection to fear of abandonment, and then it mercilessly drives the psyche with entwined serpents of perfectionism and endangerment. And that's what he's trying to cover here. If you've grown up in that environment where your inner world, your thoughts and feelings in your body and your behaviors were under attack and scrutiny, and it is horrific, the ongoing life impact of that. And largely, we don't even get close to working this stuff out until we get sober from some of the things we did to disassociate from the pain. I largely work as an addiction therapist with people that have had to give up more than one addiction in their lifetime. And I certainly relate to that. Getting off drugs and alcohol 34 years ago seems easy now compared to food or sexuality. So if you're out there and you're listening to this and you relate to this, you found this just through the title, Shrinking the Inner Critic, and if you're speaking to yourself the way that if someone else spoke to you, you'd have to kill them, then please reach out to a therapist that's trauma-informed. Look for groups like ACOA or CODA. Start to find some allies. I simply don't know how people get through this when they're not aligned with healthy folks. I do know in Pete's book, he says some of us are so traumatized, we have to start with pets, and we have to start by just creating a safer environment at home. He would maybe say that if you are watching this video, that you are looking for something and you mightn't be in that category. So anyway, this is MOvember. It was day 23. The weekend was full of some workshops, so I didn't make videos. We just invested in those. But be gentle with your heart. I look forward to making another video tomorrow. And thanks for supporting MOvember.